Muncie Land Bank First Friday Property Abandonment and Housing Development meeting. We like to start by giving people some time to get food. Got here a little late, but we'll take maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get food, sit down. So you're welcome to do that now or in a few minutes. Who all is this your first time being here for this meeting? Okay, great. We got some new folk. We like to, ask anybody if it's your first time to please introduce yourself and share anything else you'd like. So I saw 5 or 6 hands, so start over here. Try to get people that are kind of doing work related to these same issues of housing development, dealing with issues of abandonment and vacancy in the same room. Have some conversations, invite people from the outside that are doing things that maybe we're not doing here, and spark conversations, spark some ideas. And following up on what Rebecca was saying about Tom, who's a professor of architecture at Ball State, he gave a presentation on these kind of pre-approved development plans from South Bend. We haven't done a great job of following up, but there's some energy there that we'd love to take a next step. And maybe that looks like getting a group of people to go to South Bend, have a conversation with the city, have a conversation with University of Notre Dame, who I know is involved, and saying, what would it take to get something like that here? So it is a meeting, but we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about, wanting this to be something that turns into like actionable things. Today, like Rebecca said, we mostly invite people from the outside to come in and talk about their work, whether here or elsewhere in the state. And then sometimes we like to pause and do a little bit of an update on what we're doing. And so we're using this space today to do that. You can see the title is we're starting some new work in Whiteley and industry, and so we just want to share with you all and get feedback. I know that there are some people from those neighborhoods here, but everybody's feedback is very welcome. It doesn't have to be just a presentation, it can be a conversation. I did not say my name's Nate Howard. I'm the director of the Muncie Land Bank, been at it for 4 years, and Zach, you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Zachary Gullion. I'm the GIS and Property Systems Manager. I do most of the research we complete. I do a lot of the data work at the Land Bank.
Okay, so we have a presentation, but questions and comments are welcome. Just a quick overview. Anytime I'm one of those people that whenever I want to talk about something, we feel like you have to frame it. And so we're going to spend a fair bit of time framing so that it makes sense. What we're really wanting to share about is what we're hoping to do in Whiteley and industry going forward. But so we're going to talk about land banking in general, talking about vacant and abandoned property. Zach is going to delve into the tax sale a little bit, and also property tax system. We're going to then talk a little bit about what the Land Bank has done in the past, what the Land Bank has done in the Old West End to set up what we're hoping to do in industry in Whiteley. So, how many of y'all are familiar with Scout Muncie? This was a study done. It took about a year and a half, and it was basically it was a community-driven, volunteer-run investigative project to basically figure out in Muncie how many vacant lots we have, how many vacant structures, and so you can see the numbers there. About 5%, 4.6% of properties were vacant buildings, and then 8% vacant lots. And 62% of all the structures in Muncie are within 300 feet of a vacant building, which is a pretty impressive statistic. One of the challenges that we have as a land bank, and I think we all have in general, is like getting good, accurate, updated information. This took a year and a half. It took hundreds of volunteers, took money. There's not a great system with staying up on this in a precise manner. You can make assumptions about things. We've been using students in the second year planning studio to go out and do this kind of again in specific areas, and we're slowly kind of building an updated map. But this was, and I would just say that certainly there's been some changes. Maybe it's gone down a little bit, maybe it's gone up a little bit. What we're seeing in our neighborhood level studies that it's pretty accurate still, kind of the ratio, the numbers, the percentages. And we're also, in the tax sale, it's not a direct correlation, but generally what goes to the tax sale is it's the owner is negligent, which there's a strong correlation with it being abandoned and vacant. And in the numbers of properties that end up in the tax sale are about the same every year, between 650, 700 in there every year. So that's a significant portion of Muncie that's dealing with this issue. Just another look at it. This was a study done in 2019 by an outside consultant called CZB, kind of evaluating the structural health of Muncie. And you can see the red is severely distressed. The I guess dark green is excellent, and you can see again, a good portion of Muncie. The yellow is moderate distressed, and then the red you can see spackled in there, pretty distressed. Dr. West, who many of you know, the founder of the Land Bank, Professor Urban, he always talks about Muncie being like a Pac-Man. Like you've got this yellow Pac-Man, and then you just got this one sliver kind of in the Ball State, Ball Memorial area that's kind of thriving, and the rest is kind of, certainly the most severely distressed properties back in 2019 are likely still distressed or demolished now, and so now just adding to our vacant lots. Big question is, you can see 30% were average or vulnerable to decline. And a big question that we have is, how many of those have now become distressed? We don't know. So the cost of abandonment is where I want to go now. So these kind of lead here. What does disinvestment spiral sound like to you? How would you? Anybody take a stab at that? Red?
It's kind of a social comparison. I look to the right of me, I look to the left of me. What do I see? Well, it's either uplifting or it's discouraging.
Yeah.
If it's discouraging, I'm probably not going to do a whole lot to make my property better than anything else in the neighborhood. In fact, I might be looking to relocate and make my property worse.
Exactly.
That's the way I think of it.
Exactly. Just, when you've got abandoned property around you, what does that do to your property value? It drives it down. Why am I going to invest money in my property, take care of it, if it's not going to, change the market reality for me? People are obviously that are looking for places to invest money aren't going to go into a neighborhood and think, well, I'm going to invest right here. I'm going to put my nest egg in here. When they see, broken windows and dumping in vacant lots, and so it's just kind of this. It's a downward spiral. This kind of idea how abandonment and vacancy can affect a neighborhood economically, but also psychologically. Safety and stability risks, obviously, as we were talking about, abandoned houses. There's a lot of health risks associated with abandonment. Vacant lots, yeah, they attract vermin, attract, again, dumping. Those things create all kinds of safety risks and just creates kind of an unstable environment for people that have to deal with it on a daily basis, see it. And then barriers to revitalization. This is a little bit more perspective of the land bank and kind of planners. When you've got all this abandoned property that are owned by 100 different people for 100 different reasons, it's really hard to do anything that's coordinated, that's planned, because you can't access the property. You can't start to make plans and say, we have this, we have that, what can we do with it, bring in actors. There's just all, in addition to title issues, abandoned property, maybe, one of the things that we spend a lot of time and money on are untangling those title issues. We get a property, it's a liability. It takes a lot of time and money to untangle those and get it closer to being a potential asset again. So abandonment and vacancy, these three kind of more general ideas, but mostly experienced by the direct neighborhood. There's also some, specific, very more specific economic things that, based on a study that was done in Cleveland, nearby homes, I think was within like about 150 feet of abandoned property, lose 10% of their property value, assessed value. So that not only affects the homeowner, but also it affects the property taxes that are able to be levied. And then when you have abandonment and vacancy, people aren't paying taxes. And we estimate, based on, again, very basic calculations, $2 to $3 million in lost tax revenue every year for Muncie. Ongoing costs for mowing, police and fire, you can read that yourself. There was a study done in Austin. There are like 2 to 3 times more calls for drugs, thefts, fires associated with abandoned and vacant property. That's a cost. Somebody's got to bear, that's taxpayers. And then here's just a couple examples from a study that was done in South Bend, a property that's been left for structure for 8 years, and then finally it's demolished because there's nothing else that can be done, roughly $31,000. And, when you're talking about hundreds of abandoned structures, that adds up quickly. And then vacant lots, again, the example is 5 years. That costs the city taxpayers, up to $15,000 to deal with. Lots of costs. And I just want to say that, when we share these kinds of things, it does kind of get old being always starting on this negative kind of but this is the reality. And it's a reality that lots of cities face. It's not just dogging on Muncie. It's a reality of especially cities and towns and municipalities all through the Rust Belt, all areas that grew up with factories, and then those factories left. And it's not the only reason why, but it's one of the reasons that we have so much abandonment and vacancy. And then the costs associated with it. So, a land bank, what is a land bank? A land bank is it's just a tool that's been created to try to help with this issue. It's not some silver bullet. It's not the end-all, be-all. It's a tool in the toolbox that cities and counties can use to try to deal with this issue a little bit. And so in the most basic sense, this is what a land bank is. It's an entity that all this abandoned and vacant property, it's an entity that has as its mission to go out and acquire that. And now how you acquire it is very key, and we're going to talk about that. But it's acquiring that property and taking that property and trying to do what needs to be done physically and legally to basically take what's a liability, clean it up, and position it to be a potential asset again. And then in some way, get it back to the public. Now, what determines what a land bank is in our context here in Muncie, it depends on government. It depends on law. It depends on state law. And it also depends on kind of relationships that a land bank has with local government. In Indiana, this is the state law, kind of highlights some of the main points. But basically the gist of what the Indiana Land Bank law is basically says, land bank, you can exist. But you can see the part highlighted in red, there's no obligations on local government to support a land bank. They can, and you can enter into interlocal agreements, but you're not obligated to. So the land bank was formed in 2017 by city ordinance under this law. In an ideal world, the land bank has two very basic needs: money and property. And so in an ideal world, this is kind of how a land bank would get its property. You've got, private ownership that is negligent, and then as a result of that, there's some momentary public ownership, and then the land bank is an off-ramp for property that nobody wants. That's in the government's hands for a moment. They do some things to it. They might run it through a tax sale. They might do something else. But there's some kind of place for the land bank to insert itself in there and be an off-ramp for properties that nobody's responding to. And then the land bank does its work, and then it's back into private ownership. That's kind of the ideal scenario. I'm going to pass it off to Zach here. He's going to get into this a little bit more. Yeah.
So as you can see in this graphic, a really big part of what we do at the land bank and a really big part of supporting government operations is property tax. That's how it's been for years, and that's still how it is right now for a very large part. So when these properties decide to go delinquent and not paying taxes, that means they're not contributing to the tax rolls and supporting these local government operations anymore. So part of our job as a land bank is to take these properties and return them to the tax rolls to, again, support these processes that are completed by local government. I'm going to go over a quick overview of just what property tax is before I go into talking about the tax sale. But again, property tax is essential to supporting local government. It's a critical funding source for all types of taxing units, from cities and counties and townships to public schools and libraries. Property taxes are relatively stable. So since your property isn't going to be assessed but every year, the property tax revenue is going to be relatively predictable. It's not going to fluctuate as much with economic changes as sales tax and income taxes would. And this is a relatively controversial point, but some say that property tax is more equitable because higher income earners and higher net worth individuals are going to have more valuable or a greater quantity of real estate than lower income earners, especially because those lower income earners might be renters and wouldn't be paying those property taxes directly. This is a quote from Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, who's a think tank really leading the way in this research on property tax and local government revenue streams. They say that property tax is a key strength as a revenue instrument for local governments. It's the most stable tax source. It's more progressive than alternative revenue options, which would be income and sales, and then it promotes local autonomy. So the local governments, since they have their own designated revenue streams, they can make their own decisions instead of relying at the state or the federal level. So what happens when these properties don't pay taxes or they go delinquent? For a property to go delinquent in Indiana, and then be listed on the tax certificate sale, it's going to have 3 consecutive missed payments. So that would be spring, fall, spring, fall, something like that. That minimum bid at the tax sale that bidders are going to have to pay on that tax certificate to get the tax certificate is going to be delinquent taxes, and then fines, special assessments, and then other fees. So what are the goals of the tax sale? Is to recoup delinquent taxes and to return properties to productive use. They want to get these properties in the hands of a bidder who's going to pay those taxes and return that money to the local units of government. And they also want to return those properties to productive use, whether that be housing or commercial or another type of use. So what are the possible outcomes of this? If these properties aren't purchased at the tax certificate sale, which you'll see in a minute, it's actually a large percentage of them, they will continue to accumulate delinquent taxes and then probably be relisted at the next tax certificate sale. They can be converted to a tax deed and then be listed at the tax deed sale. Or they can be granted to an individual or an organization through an official resolution, which is actually how the land bank acquires a lot of our properties. So to go back a little bit, the tax certificate sale, that's when it's an auction format where you place a bid on the tax delinquency that a property has and you get the certificate. For individuals and organizations, it's a 12-month period where someone can come and redeem their property, the original owner, and there's several legal processes that you have to go through to convert that property into a deed. For us, for nonprofits in Indiana, it's a 6-month period, so that time's cut in half. So we do have an advantage there. So what happens? A lot of these bidders will go to the sale. It's a lot of LLCs, semi-large organizations in the area, and they'll bid on these tax certificates with a lot of money, actually. So what happens to these dollars that are bid on properties and tax certificates that are much more than was originally owed on those properties in the first place? So the original owner, if they decide not to redeem their property and that property goes to who bought the tax certificate, the divested owner can actually claim that surplus. So if an organization goes to the tax sale and buys a tax certificate for $50,000, which we see plenty of times, and they were only delinquent $10,000 on the property, they have a right to that $40,000 surplus. The county and the taxing units are able to be made whole, but they're not supposed to profit. The certificate purchaser, so if the original owner decides to go back and actually redeem their property, they can claim, the bidder can claim their surplus back. So their bid dollars, they can get back in their pocket. There's also a clause that says that the original owner is supposed to pay 10% of the due amount, so that minimum bid plus 10% in order to get their property back. For several reasons, that property is not actually supposed to go to the county. And then the county general fund. So in Indiana, it says that if neither party claims surplus within 3 years, the county is actually supposed to keep all of that money. So all of that excess amount between the minimum bid and what was paid. A recent court case in the Supreme Court in 2023 said someone sued in Minnesota, and they actually found, the Supreme Court, that money is still owed to the original owner, and they didn't specify an amount of time that it's actually supposed to be. So a lot of states are actually going back through these clauses and making changes as they see necessary. So the way that we look at this is that property speculation by out-of-state investors and even in-state local investors who just want to have a large property portfolio, they're actually being incentivized to do this because they can spread their bids as large as they'd like to get as much property as they want, and if they don't get the property, they get their money back. So they're not really at risk of anything. You can see on this graph though below, the minimum bid, this is for 2024, the minimum bid, that's how much taxes were owed in the green of properties that ended up selling at the tax certificate sale. So this is right after the sale, this is before any redemptions happened, but this is, so it's almost it's $600,000. What bidders decided to pay, what these companies and individuals decided to pay on these tax certificates was almost $3.9 million. So surplus that existed from this was almost 3.3. So that actually is more than all the properties that didn't sell. There's more surplus tax dollars than all the properties that didn't sell. So it can look at face value, it can look like this process is working from an economic or financial standpoint. But the problem is that these sold certificates, when original owners go to redeem this minimum bid, or they go to redeem their properties, they only have to pay the minimum bid plus that 10%. They don't have to pay all that surplus. So that surplus amount now versus when this process started is a lot lower. More about the tax sale. So we created an interlocal agreement proposal to the county back in April, and we said we want to be able to make our footprint countywide and expand our processes. And what we did was we kind of critiqued the tax sale. So we talked about the successes. What it says here: the tax sale is effective at recouping delinquent taxes on properties that are appearing for just the first time. So if they're listed for the first time in the history that we had available to us. Delaware County taxing units recouped, again, this surplus of $3.28 million on tax certificates that sold. So a lot of those, again, that sold were actually just appearing for their first time. But properties that are appearing for more than their first time, so like in 3 sales, 2022 through 2024, 85.1% of properties appearing for the first time sold, but those 14, that doesn't make sense. That's, in contrast, properties, I didn't click, in contrast, properties that are going through the tax sale for the second time see a dramatic decrease in minimum bid price. Properties that are appearing in the tax sale for the third or more time are unlikely to sell at all. So for the past 3 sales, 1,080 properties that were listed actually went unsold. So this is 89.7% of properties were appearing for the third or more time. Again, so just a lot of these properties, they've been on the tax sale multiple times, time after time, and they don't sell. Every time they go, if they're not converted to a deed by the county, they just end up going back to the tax certificate sale. 13.8% of these properties that didn't sell had been through the process more than 10 times. So even if these properties go to the deed or they get redeemed, they can still end up back on the sale soon. So that data is from 2011 to 2024. So their 13.8% of properties have been through more than 10 times. Again, this is going to highlight those main points. So 89.7% of unsold properties had previously appeared at least 2 times, and 13.8% had appeared at least 10 times. And this here is showing from 2011 to 2024. In the blue, that's going to be the minimum amount paid, so how much people paid for these certificates, and in the green, that's going to be the median minimum bid, so how much those properties were delinquent. So at the first sale, you can see that the median amount paid was extraordinarily above how much was actually owed on that property. But as soon as you get to the second tax sale appearance by a property, it drops to only $800 above what that taxes owed were. And then the third, far below, and fourth and on, $0. People aren't bidding on those properties at all. If a property has been through the tax sale at least 3 times, so it's gotten to the fourth appearance in these years, no one's bidding on that property. No one wants it. So the private market capitalism has rejected these properties. This is going to be a time lapse here of the last 10 years, so since 2015. This is every tax sale property that has gone delinquent and been listed on a tax certificate sale. Even if it's been redeemed, even if it's sold, they're all here. But it really shows that it kind of looks like it's an infection. The blight or the vacancy, the abandonment, it spreads. So it starts from one area and then all around it, more properties start to be listed on that sale. So we think that strategic intervention is really important here because, I mean, this kind of shows that the tax sale is falling short. And a strategic intervention by an organization, whether it be the land bank or otherwise, is important. So at the neighborhood level, we found that the tax sale process disproportionately, tax sale properties are located in the industry and Whiteley neighborhoods. So 28.4% of all properties listed on the tax sale in just the last 3 years, so 2022 through 2024, in Delaware County, so the entire list for the county, 28.4% of those were located in just 2 City of Muncie neighborhoods. These 2 City of Muncie neighborhoods only contain 4.8% of parcels in all of Delaware County. This graph here shows the counts, so those appearances. So in industry is 15% of all of Delaware County, which actually exceeds all of non-Muncie Delaware County, which is only 14% of properties. Again, listed on those last 3 sales. So this is a time lapse of the industry neighborhood. Again, showing that those tax sale appearances popping up over the last 10 years. You can see just how it spreads from one property to another. And soon after a 10-year period, a lot of the neighborhood has become tax delinquent at some point in time and been listed on the tax sale. So what's this mean for the Muncie Land Bank? The tax sale is the largest contributor in some capacity to the Muncie Land Bank in terms of property acquisition. The tax sale really demonstrates which areas in the city are in need to a degree of a strategic intervention, as like I said earlier, the open or the private market isn't really responding to these properties. So what has the MLB done to address these shortfalls? This map here is a map of our properties in Muncie right now, excluding all the tax certificate and deed properties. And then this is all of the tax certificate and deed properties that we've gotten. And this includes properties that we've gotten through an ask to the county, so the Delaware County Commissioners have actually given us. And the Delaware County Commissioners are apt to give us those properties after they've already gone through that tax sale process multiple times, properties that they haven't been able to get any money back for. So we've gotten actually 36.8% of our inventory, whether it's sold or we still hold it, from the tax sale process, again, including those asks to the commissioners. So Nate's going to take over here and talk about how the Muncie Land Bank has shifted strategies to kind of this tax sale, getting properties from the tax sale focus, and so on. Thank you.
Fred?
Quick question about, was there any cross-indexing between properties that are in the tax sale that are vacant versus those that have improvements on them? I'm just kind of curious. Does having a derelict house that needs demolished improve its ability to sell or decrease its ability to sell in a public tax sale?
It depends, but what I have graphics that I've created on using like the improvement versus the land value, and then the time it is on the tax sale, and then the likelihood or the amount of minimum bid it gets, and the likelihood that it's actually going to sell. I think what we found is that for the most part, vacant lots are less likely to sell, whether there's a structure on that property or not. But there is like a range between like $0 and $1,000 that a property will have improvement, which it's just going to be a shed or something, or a broken down garage, and those might be less likely to sell than vacant lots. But they're relatively equal. But if it has like 10,000 or more in improvement, so it is a structure or a home, it usually would sell prior to vacant lots. Like all the properties that are being listed on the deed sale right now are from the tax certificate sale in 2024. All of those that didn't sell that are being listed right now, or almost all of them, are all vacant lots.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before I jump in here, Zach's done amazing research. I mean, it kind of revolutionized our ability as a land bank to kind of make arguments, kind of like say, hey, this may be where there's a place for the land bank. This may be where some of the shortcomings of the processes that are happening are happening. Any questions about kind of the major kind of things that Zach presented there? So I feel like Zach's probably going to end up working for the Department of Labor Statistics Now since there's some openings. It's a joke, bad. But anyways, it can be kind of heady. And like I have to stop and ask Zach to interpret things for me and ask questions. And kind of in general, again, kind of like more of a layman, kind of a novice understanding is that the tax sale is, there's kind of two objectives of the tax sale kind of insinuated in the tax code. One is recoup property taxes, and two is to kind of move properties from negligent owners to kind of productive, responsive ownership. And what we're kind of seeing is that the tax sale is really effective at recouping tax dollars for properties that go through the first time. And then after that, it drastically decreases. You saw that big surplus, and then it started to narrow, and then it became negative. And I would just add in that's just the cost to the county as far as bid versus what people are willing to pay for them, or the minimum taxes owed, what people are paying. That's not taking into account all those costs that we were already talking about. So that's one thing that is clear. If it goes through the tax sale once, it's likely to sell the first time. Then after that, if it gets through that first sale without selling, then it's gone its way. It's kind of a death sentence. And then what you have really year after year is like a backlog of properties that nobody want. The market's rejected, and they just sit and rot. They may sell and then go back to the tax sale, but that's one of the major kind of things that I take away from that. The other thing is, just slipped me. What was I going to say? Oh, well, the other thing is that we don't know definitively, and that's actually one of the things that we're going to be studying between now and next spring, is how effective is the tax sale at moving property from negligence to productive, responsive ownership. We can say, in general, it's not that great. However, it's really hard because we don't have anything to compare to. A 1 out of 10 hit rate is a 1 out of 10 hit rate against nothing. What's the alternative? We're saying, let us try to be that alternative, but we haven't got there. So going back to where we left off here, so the Muncie Land Bank. When we first started, and so the Land Bank was founded in 2017, we really kind of started to function actually as an organization, get property and do things in 2019. So those initial efforts we were kind of working, thinking of ourselves as like we're a traditional land bank. We get property that nobody wants, we take it, whatever, and then we were figuring out ways to get it back to the public. A big thing that we do that's a distinction of the tax sale is that we vet people that are wanting to take ownership of property. We get to know them a little bit, we check their finances, we check their track record, we ask them what their plans are, and we try to hold them accountable. So we kind of started there. But we kind of realized not too soon after that, just because we don't have a steady pipeline of properties, we can go to the county and ask for properties. We've gotten some properties from the Muncie Redevelopment Commission. We've got a lot of properties from other nonprofits in town that were doing their own land banking and said, okay, you exist now, take them. And we just took them. But we kind of realized we don't have a steady pipeline. We don't have steady, funding source. So we got to be a little bit smarter with what property we're acquiring and what we're doing with it. And so that looked like a more strategic approach to acquisition, and then relying heavily on our nonprofit developers to basically take individual properties that we get and do something with them. So again, that's Habitat, that's Urban Light CDC, that's Eco Rehab, that's Pathstone, and so that's what we did there for a while, and we continue doing that. But then what we've really shifted to in late 2023 into the present is seeing ourselves humbly as kind of like the convener. Can we strategically acquire property that neighborhood residents, that stakeholders, that organizations that have a stake in the neighborhood? Can we get all these people to the table? Can we use data that we've collected from students, sit down and say, this is where we want to focus on concentrating resources, getting property, and then can we, with that same group of people, come up with a development plan? That's what we've been kind of doing. And to be honest with you, what we've kind of moved into is not really land banking per se. But it's what we can do. It's what we feel like we have to offer. And so that kind of sets up, well, one more slide before I get into it. Just to make clear, like the three things that we do with properties, that map that Zach showed you, is one, if it's a property that just nobody wants, we've got a couple properties that are in the woods somewhere in a swamp. Nobody wants them, we're just holding them. We've got some properties in a floodplain. Nobody can do anything with them. We're just mowing them. We're insuring them and mowing and making sure that they don't cause problems. Then nothing we can do. Maybe something changes and we can. But right now, nothing to do with them. And then we have other properties that have a little bit of economic kind of value maybe, but they're not tied to any strategic plans that we've been working on. And so those are the properties that we run through our website. We have an auction for vacant lots, and we have a little bit different process for properties with structures. But that portion of our work is shrunk. If we had more properties, if we were that pipeline, that would grow. But we don't, so it's shrunk. And this is where the 55 properties that we have right now, or actually a little bit less because we just sold some of them. Most of those, I think we have maybe 5 or 6 properties that are these first two categories. The other 80, 85, 90% are here. And when we talk about partners, this is kind of what we're talking about. All these organizations. One of the things that I've learned from Annette here, she has a phrase, it's bob and weave. I say shuck and jive, but she says bob and weave. But that's what we've had to do is figure it out, bob and weave. Where's their energy? Where's their interest? Where's their enthusiasm? And then work with all these different folks to try to figure it out. So, getting into kind of the meat of what we want to share with y'all today, what we're doing, this coalition building, place-based community development, it's not just coming from thin air. It's something that I mentioned. CZB came in and did that structural health survey at the onset. They were here 2020, 2021, and worked with the county and the city, and they came up with something called the Together DM, which is basically the comprehensive development plan for Muncie and Delaware County. And in that, there's a fair bit of reference to something called block by block development. How many of you are familiar with that kind of? Anybody talk a little bit about that? Anybody want to? Tom?
So block by block development would be like instead of scattershot, you know, you're going to just do a project on a vacant parcel here and another one over there. Try to concentrate on a particular block and try to develop or to revitalize that block before you move on to another.
And exactly, yeah. And why would there be that emphasis on that kind of strategy? Property value, meaning like one specific area, because if you don't do a whole specific area, at the same time you're doing a one-off here, you got more abandoned property coming up, and so it's if we concentrate resources to deal with the blight that's constantly kind of spreading, doing one-offs doesn't quite get to the root. Doesn't create the possibility of something different. Susan?
And people can actually see the momentum when you have it in a concentrated area, whereas where it's scattered, nobody knows what's going on.
Exactly. Visible kind of maybe starts to kind of chip away at that psychology of nobody's doing it, nothing's happening, but you see something kind of take root, and that encourages other folks.
I always like picture these little groupings of projects as like puzzle pieces, particularly what we've seen in the Old West End, like somebody's working here, land bank's here, and then all those things start coming together, and then people start doing the little parts in between, and then the whole picture the puzzle gets completed.
Yeah.
And when you concentrate, also when you're working with a developer that might have the capacity to do more than one property, they can also get economy of scale if you do have those properties close to each other.
Exactly, yeah.
And the impact is just greater because it isn't scattered.
Yeah. So it's kind of like it's I think of it as, it's kind of like catalytic. Right?
You're able to take advantage of the resources. So you're not delegating in the masses here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
You're able to take advantage of the resources in one target-focused area, so that it doesn't feel like so many moving parts and expenses are escalating as you have to be here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
That targeted focus about you're able to take advantage of the resources and keep them centrally located.
Yeah, exactly. Good.
Resources makes me think about partnerships. And one of the things that I'm starting to see in areas around the city, like McKinley neighborhood and the Old West End, is partnerships between government, the individual developers, and the agencies that are involved in it. When you're starting to put these things together more than one at a time and starting to look like a block, encouragement for the street department to pay some attention to that area. There's some encouragement for
Totally, yeah.
government entities to, fix the sidewalk, make the curbs better, make sure the sewers are working and the trash collection's
Yeah.
working.
Totally, yeah. Private, public partnerships, big part of kind of what we were trying to be a part of. We're trying to facilitate or be a part of. Yeah, this is just kind of summarizing what everybody was saying. I think too, for me, block by block, it's really hard to plan Muncie all at once. I mean, it's kind of big. I mean, when you're, how many people are in your guys' department?
Yeah, there's 9.
Nine.
That includes the building commissioner.
Yeah. So 9 for the county. We are 2 and 3 people. Ruby's part-time. She's an intern. And we're not doing what you all are doing, but we're trying to do some. But it's it's a lot of resources to be able to plan and then facilitate. And so I think taking things on a smaller scale makes planning become so much more tangible and practical. And then also this idea of like it's incremental. We heard Tom Corcoran from South Bend come. We heard some people from Fort Wayne come and talk about like one of the things that a big paradigm shift for them was like, there are people here that can do this stuff. There are people in these neighborhoods that have skills, they've got resources, they're invested, so they want to see this happen. Let's figure out how to include them in this process. And I think when I think about block by block, I think about that, it being incremental. Like you're slowly building a coalition of not just organizations, but also people that are supporters, but also participants. And I think on a block by block level, that can happen. So kind of repeating what we've talked about, we say this is a model for disinvested neighborhoods, what we're getting into here. And what we mean is that, basically the market is not responding to these parts of Muncie that we see where there's abandonment and vacancy happening. The market's just not there. It's not responding. So we can either sit and wait and hope, or we can try to be proactive and use data, involve the community, involve a coalition of folks, use different tools, and combine private and public partnerships to say, okay, maybe we can do something even though the market's not just on itself, by itself responding. And maybe, kind of like what Rebecca was saying, maybe if we do that, then the market will start to respond, big and small. It'll just kind of start to fill in. So our hope is that we're catalyzing investment. So it's not just when we go to Dan and say, give us a bunch of money, Ball Brothers Foundation. We're not just taking that money and just spending it, and that's it. Like, our hope is that it's an investment. It's not a subsidy, it's an investment. We're making an investment in the neighborhood, and we believe that it's going to grow from there. And then again, as I said, humbly, kind of the land bank, we kind of feel like we have this like special role. And it's in kind of setting the table, where we're using, we call it kind of like our pre-development table. Or actually, I call it that, I just made that up right now. Our pre-development table, where we have data, we have property, we have a coalition of actors and people, we have support, and we take all those three things and we go and then we try to get some funding, whether that's from public sources or other private sources. If you just go and say, we got an idea, nobody's going to pay attention to you. If you just kind of go by yourself and maybe you've got a few things in the fire, some property, nobody's going to pay attention to you. But if you go as a group and you go with data and you go with plans and you go with land, then people start to pay attention. We've mentioned this, but for example, Habitat for Humanity last year was able to get a $1 million grant because we had gone out in front and acquired property in industry neighborhood, and one of the requisites for that grant was that they've got to have property. So we created an option, basically said if this property is destined to them, and they got that $1 million grant. And we got that property because the Delaware County government, the commissioners, entrusted us that property. So it's not just them giving things away to us and giving the land bank special considerations. No, it's an investment. It's a whole process of making an investment. And that $1 million is going to be used to build 10 houses, Taylor? 10 total houses, which is awesome. And we played a small part in that. But anyways, that setting the pre-development table. So feel like the best way to kind of share with you what we're hoping to do in Whiteley and Industry is talk about what we've been doing in the Old West End. Everybody familiar with that neighborhood? It's between downtown and Ball State. It's a historic neighborhood. We thought, well, there's a lot of need. It's another neighborhood that has experienced all kinds of disinvestment, lots of abandonment. But it's also an area that has a lot of potential. You got the downtown being revitalized, growing up. There's a lot of energy. It's right next door. Maybe we can take advantage of that investment in downtown and try to do something there. And so anyways, that's why we chose to start there. It's visible. Somebody talked about that earlier. Susan, it's something that's you can see. And, you know, thinking about, from the land bank perspective, trying to gain public support, like, let's do something right there downtown where everybody's focused. So that's where we started. What do we do? So we started with, we have a huge resource for the land bank is our partnership with the College of Architecture and Planning, Urban Planning Department. We used students, third-year students, to go out and do data collection in Old West End. This was Kayla, who was the pioneer. They went out. Anything to share about that experience? Best of your life?
I honestly, that's when I felt like I understood planning, but it was cool. We did like a lot of neighborhood partnerships and just kind of like analyzing the neighborhood and targeting which certain blocks.
Yeah, they did an amazing job of kind of giving us that initial layer of data to understand the neighborhood. Where's there abandoned and vacant property? Where are there amenities? Where there's lots of tax delinquency, maybe we could acquire property. Where there's need. We had that. And then we also used another third-year studio later on in the process to help us create more information about what we could do in this neighborhood. What could we do with property? And we've also, the architecture studio has also helped with that whole process. Just to say, we have used lots of Ball State studio classes to do that data surveying, that initial kind of community engagement. It's a vehicle. And it gives us a shiny project, you know, a shiny report to say, look what we've done. And also a lot of information to make decisions on. So that first studio that Kayla was a part of, they did this whole study of the whole Old West End. And we said, based on that, with the neighborhood association, with our partners, where do we want to focus? And we, right here, South Council, this is where we said, this is where we want to do our block by block work. And so the land bank said, okay, we're going to go get property. And so we started out with a grant from Ball Brothers Foundation, went out, we sent letters to hundreds of people in that area and offered to buy their property. And we started piecing together a little bit, kind of a property map. And then we went to the county commissioners and said, county commissioners, look, we've used money from private philanthropy. We've put our chip in here. Would you all? And they said yes. And they gave us an additional 23 properties to kind of start to fill in that. And then we also got some donations from Owner, which is a local redevelopment organization. We got 3 properties from the Muncie Redevelopment Commission. So some of those we've moved, done different things with, but right now we have 36 properties in the Old West End in one specific area. So another step in there, which this isn't exact a timeline, but we were creating what we called the Old West End Development Alliance. And so these are starting with the neighborhood association, the local residents, and then asking the other mostly nonprofit developers that have a footprint there, do y'all want to join in? Can we do something together? And so we formed this alliance. And we've been meeting once a month for the last year or something like that. Had a lot of meetings outside of our normal scheduled time. Spent a lot of time out in the neighborhood. Just real quick, I won't take too long here. We're getting close to our closing time. Intend Indiana is one of the organizations in this. Intend brings a lot of resources from Indianapolis. They're also a nonprofit developer. They've been involved with revitalizing large parts of the near east side, I think it is, of Indianapolis. And they have a bunch of different programs that's focused on affordable housing development. And they have something that's called a Community Development Finance Institute in-house, which is basically a bank which is allowed to do, has the ability to do a lot of community development focused lending, which a normal bank doesn't have as much freedom to do. They do, they're one of our key partners. All that together, property, data, coalition, and what we came up with was our Old West End Neighborhood Comprehensive Development Project, which in the project it talks about the construction of 30 plus new homes, a number of rehabs, some business lending, some green space development, all in there. And we took that. There happened to be a big state economic development grant that was open to proposals. We presented a proposal. It was good enough for the city to say, why don't we collaborate? And we rolled it into one big project called the Central City Housing Project. It's not been fully approved. The announcement's not been made. We can't say for sure that it's happening. It feels like it is going to happen. But that's how this process worked. That's how this process worked. And that's what we are wanting to start. Now, it's going to look very differently in Industry and Whiteley, but that's what we're starting to do there. Last year, we had another studio from Ball State go out and do that initial kind of like survey. Just give us that first layer of data so we can look at the neighborhood and say, okay, what's going on? Now we're in the process of having conversations with leadership there in each neighborhood, organizations, and also just indigenous leadership. Say, okay, help us understand. We got this, this is the information. We want to work here. We want to invest resources in here. Where do we do it? Who do we do it with? And how do we do it? And that's where we're at right now. We're planning for a third-year studio, so another class this fall. We're going to ask them to go out. They're going to do a quality of life survey in both Industry and Whiteley. They're going to we're going to do some deep dive into how effective the tax sale or not effective the tax sale has been in Industry and Whiteley, because a big part of what we need is the county to say, you know what we're doing, maybe it's not working so well in these two neighborhoods. And we're talking about what Zach said, more than 25% of the properties that go to the tax sale are from those two neighborhoods. And it's like 80-90% of the properties that go to the tax sale from those, they don't sell. They just churn. And so we're saying, why don't we look at this from a different angle? Maybe we can play a role in there. So we're going to ask the students to help us with a deep dive into that impact. And then kind of our next final piece of that class with the neighborhood again is coming up with a corridor, picking a corridor, not the whole neighborhood, they're too big, but saying if we focus in this area, maybe these 3 or 4 or 5 blocks, could we focus here? What's going on here? Could we focus here? We'll go out and try to get the property. And then we'll come back to the table with everybody and say, now, what's our proposal? What is it going to look like? What do we need? Who do we need to talk to? And so part of that right now is we're going ahead, trying to get money. We just sent in a grant to Centerpoint Energy to ask for some money to go out to Whiteley to get some property. Just get it started. Kind of like we did with Ball Brothers Foundation. Go out ahead with some private philanthropy and then go to government and say, look, we're making investment. Will you guys support this? I know we're late on time. We just got a few more minutes. Zach, I'll let you take it.
So we were able to receive a grant from a national philanthropic organization, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. They gave us $50,000 to go out and continue this research that we've done on the tax sale. And really, we're going to grab that qualitative aspects about it and find out how the tax sale has really impacted residents of these two neighborhoods. So we're partnering, like Nate said, with Habitat to do a quality of life survey. And in that, we're going to include these questions about how vacancy and abandonment have affected residents. And this is just one example of questions. How has vacancy and abandoned property affected you? This is a timeline of how we're going to use those students to do this and how they fit into the whole timeline of our work in Whiteley and industry. So it's first Friday meeting. Next month, they're going to do the property conditions assessment where they're going to find, they're going to go to every single property in the neighborhoods and just take note of the current conditions physically, a block face survey. October is when we're going to conduct those quality of life interviews and ask questions about vacancy and abandonment. November is when they're going to put together those corridor development proposals based on the property conditions assessments and the interviews. Students will give their final presentations at the end of the semester. And then in January through April, we're going to do individual property case studies, a case-by-case basis, look at properties, and really get in detail how the tax sale process has affected those properties. And then we'll have a findings presentation and provide our findings to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation come May of next year. But that's all I think we have for you today. We'd love to answer any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Donilio?
Yeah, thanks for all the work that you do to try to organize these conversations around places and less about geographic places. When you put up that one slide about the neighborhoods that are impacted by white houses, you know, I'm not really anything related to housing. I'm working with substance use related issues, mental health issues, kids who are engaging in the justice system, and those are the neighborhoods where I work too. You know, and so, you know, we may have different ideas on this, but the way these neighborhoods became what they did had to do with redlining, it had to do with the war on drugs, and then inadvertently, then people's lives, the way they live, the way they move, have been impacted by that. So the question I guess I would have for these kinds of development initiatives is how are you including the people who are actually in these neighborhoods beyond community leaders? Because community leaders have figured out some way to be able to function within the context of meetings and organizational systems and things like that. But these neighborhoods are full of people who have been, you know, like there's people who use drugs in those neighborhoods, and it has a lot to do with the effects of poverty and the effects of lack of access to resources. How do they participate in, or what are strategies, I guess I would say, that you all are thinking about to
Yeah.
How do we engage with people who actually live there and are facing some of the challenges that are being created by some of these bigger groups?
I mean, if being honest, I mean, we're way short on that kind of engagement. We are going to do, like we're talking about in industry and Whiteley having hopefully 80 to 100 quality of life surveys where we're actually sitting down and talking with people. And it's not just leaders. The leaders are going to be trying to get people there. But that's going to be a little bit of a vehicle. First, at least get some input. At least make the effort to say you're invited to offer some input here. I would say again, I think bringing that up in our conversations with leadership is important because they're going to be the ones that can tell us how to do that. I don't know, but noted, and I wish we had. I mean, just kind of a tangent. I mean, I've talked about this. When I spent 7 years in some small rural areas in Guatemala, and we helped to develop a couple cooperatives, farming cooperatives. These are small little villages, and I lived out there, and it took 3 years of being present, sitting at people's kitchens at night, drinking coffee, playing with their kids, getting to know them, for that idea, this concept of a cooperative, of doing something economically tied together, for it to sink in. And it took 3 years of just like the idea. So realistically, I know from experience, we're way far away from the neighborhood really appropriating anything that we're kind of gently bringing in with leadership. I think one of the things that we hope, and I'll stop after that. One of the things that we really hope is from this deep dive into the tax sale, that it's going to be something that's going to help the neighborhood, everyone, kind of not 100% causal effect, but be able to tell a little bit more of the story about abandonment and vacancy. Because, as you said, Neil, these things are tied to historical policies. They're not just something that's happening right now. They're tied to a lack of equity being built over time because of specific things that were done to these communities. And then the tax sale and what's happening now is kind of the tool that the county and the city have been trying to use to deal with it. But we want to help them, want to add to their understanding if it's accepted. Like, hey, this is another thing that's affecting you, and you actually have a voice to be able to maybe suggest something different. I don't know if that makes sense, but Tom, sorry.
I was just going to say, the whole West End, I would say, it's a challenge. It's a really large neighborhood, and it's hard to connect with all the residents of a really large neighborhood like that. But I think what we maybe were successful in doing was to employ dozens of students to go out and find people and interact with people in the neighborhood, rather than like a typical maybe neighborhood approach where you have like a meeting and then some people come to the meeting, but lots and lots and lots of people don't. We had students go out and scour the neighborhood, interact with people on the front porches. We had a block party, like a pop-up block party we set up on the corner, and vacuumed people out of their cars and provided food, and have had different events in the yard, et cetera. So it's not perfect, like Nathan said, but I think we made an effort to try to understand who the people in the neighborhood were,
Yeah.
what they needed, what they liked, what they didn't like, why they were living there, how long they are.
Yeah, students have definitely been a great tool to kind of start to kind of get to know the neighborhood a little bit better. But there are strategies, that go beyond just having meetings. And students are really great at. Any other questions or comments? Savette?
I do love time in real estate, I've seen very good things happen. I've also seen some not very
Yeah.
good things happen. Things like easements happen. Residents being pushed out of their home because they don't match up to code standard, or they've done something not knowing that you have to apply to build structure. You know, a lot of these things are happening. So during that assessment, are you saying that you are allocating money to these residents to bring them up to par, or what will happen, or what could potentially happen, worst case scenario, with these assessments?
I mean, I would say worst case scenario is it's just a bunch of information that we've shared with the community, that we've collected with the community, and it just kind of stays there. I think that's the worst case scenario. I don't know if I'm getting the root of what you're asking. I know that part of the challenge for the land bank is that we're the Muncie Land Bank, so a lot of people associate that with, government authorities. And we experienced that when we were out in industry last year with students, like people saying, we don't like the Muncie Land Bank. We haven't heard good things of the land bank. We haven't had good experience with people coming and talking about getting property. And kind of you're like, you want to be like, no, we're different, but you can't, you've got to prove it. So that's showing up to meetings. And I think, I don't know if we did that really in the Old West End, but I feel like what we have to do, especially in Whiteley, is say, we're not coming in saying this is the problem, and we're going to let you guys kind of have a seat at the table to kind of come up with some strategies. We're basically saying, you guys tell us what's the problem, or if there's not a problem. So like letting folks be right from the get-go the ones that create the paradigm that we walk into. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for me, it's very different from doing a needs assessment and saying, oh, you need this, and then going to the community and saying, okay, do we do A or B? And then they say B, and then you say, okay, the community participated. We're kind of going blank slate saying, this is information that we've collected, help us interpret it. Is there a pathway forward? And if there's not, then we take our hat and we don't force ourselves in. I don't know. That's kind of how I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Well, I'm just taking a look at the language that has been displayed.
Yeah.
Today, and I do see some collaborations, and I do see city as a partner. And I also read the language that also said private. So I don't know what kind of power that city will have in those assessments, and that's where some of those codes come into place, pushing people out.
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to get there, because now we're already talking about housing disparities. We're already talking about the lack of finances in families and the elders. So, when I ask this question, I ask not only as a community leader, I ask as an advocate of my community.
Yeah.
As a resident, I want to make sure that there are protections in place for the people of Whiteley and English.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and I recognize, I hear what you're saying. And I feel like, for me, as the director of the land bank, our essence is community-based, place-based, coalition-building development. And that's our essence, and if that is co-opted by something else, then I'm out. That's kind of how I feel, from my perspective. Like, if it gets
That happens, the powers that be do take over. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it, I've seen it, I'm sure Mrs. Debbie's seen it. So I'm just being realistic as to worst case scenario and where we could ultimately land if we don't put those protections in place early.
Yeah, but how to put those protections in place, I'm not exactly sure. Worst case scenario might be the land bank dissolves, or the land bank ceases to, I don't know. Yeah. Brett?
I'm sorry, but you give me all kinds of good ideas. Thank you. Let me just mention, as a staff member of the planning commission, we are entering a period of change and modification, and new ordinances are on the immediate horizon. City council just this last week approved some changes to minimum lot widths and minimum lot areas, and so that's, seems like a timely time to start to talk about what some of those codes are, and to, yeah, I mean, there are possibilities here that haven't existed for decades, because I've been around for a while. So maybe be a part of a positive
So
change.
where are we able to find those new orchestrated ordinances? Are they listed somewhere, that the communities are able to go to those and see those line for line? Are they online? Do we need to come in the office and retrieve those? What is your best access point here?
I will give you a completely transparent answer. When we asked this week where we are at with being able to implement those changes that were approved by city council, they're waiting on the signature from the mayor, from the council president, and from the city clerk. Until that document is signed, it won't be released to us or anybody else, I guess. And once it is signed and released to us, we are set to include it on our website and in our zoning ordinances.
Would you say that they would first be announced at the city council level? Where would you?
City
say that?
council, my understanding is I wasn't at the city council meeting, but they approved their draft version of those changes. And I would inquire with Glenn Johnson, the city clerk, and see how quickly you can get a copy of what was approved.
I will do that.
I might be misunderstanding the question that you asked, but I think that, like, as the land bank, we don't necessarily or inherently have a stake in just acquiring property or building new homes or replacing people's broken down homes with new homes. We are invested in seeing community growth as the community themselves see it, not as we have deemed that growth to be. Like the plan that we did in the old West End, it was actually my studio year, but we did like a homeowner repair program. And if those dollars ever became available, we would be able to implement the program. And we worked with community residents to figure out what this could look like, because it's about helping residents stay in their homes, be up to code so they don't have to face those liens that are unimaginably high and do push people out of their homes. This homeowner housing repair program, if those dollars were made available, would help residents stay in their home while also helping that community see growth in beautification and things like that. But it's not just about, it's not about display. We definitely don't want to displace residents, and we would just, yeah. Our main goal isn't just to build new homes on vacant lots. I think it's much broader than that.
I'm very aware. I've been around the land bank for a long time, and I have a personal relationship with Mr. May. So I'm aware, but this is new treaded territory, and I just want to make sure that my community is protected. That's all.
I think you raised a really good point, and you talk about unoccupied rehab. When Pastone was involved with that, it was very hard because you want to help people, but when you go into their home, maybe it's for one thing, you see all this other stuff. And we, along with the partners that we work with, had to do a lot of creative problem solving
displaced because, now, there's been eyes on an issue, right? And so I think it is really, kind of behooves the land bank to maybe be thinking about like some of those kind of situations that you might run into. And, the owner occupied rehab resource or whatever is definitely probably something that would be useful, because you're gonna see that.
Yeah.
When you go out.
Yeah.
I mean, and those types of things are immediate. Condemned, you go into a home that you know is not fit, there's exposed, and harmful displays of electricity and things that you know that just are inhabitable. So, we do have to be very mindful and careful, with those types of sensitive issues when we talk about that. And if there's resources to help that family, be where they need to be versus being on the condemn list.
Yeah.
In this place.
Last point before we'll just close, but responding a little bit to your concern, Yvette, or in talking about worst case scenario again. I think we're proposing development. We're proposing some housing. We're proposing supporting a business corridor. We're proposing green space development. Thanks for coming. However, that may not happen. That may not happen. That's going to take a lot of energy. It's going to take a lot of community involvement. We're not going to be the protagonist. We can help, but we can't be the protagonist, and we know that. So a lot of it depends on how much the neighborhood is ready and wants to. One of the things that we've thought about is if all that development doesn't happen, could we potentially, with the community, propose to the county, instead of running all these properties that go to the tax sale that don't sell, instead of just letting them sit there, could the land bank with the community be the steward of those properties? And in the land bank right now, for properties that we get, that we sell back to the public, we have what we call our acquisition and disposition committee. Anybody who wants to get a property has to submit an application, speak to the committee. There's a whole process. And we thought maybe at a minimum, the land bank could be the conduit to grab those properties and then work with the community to develop a committee so that anybody who's acquiring property in their neighborhood, there's at least the neighborhood is at least aware and either signing off on it or saying no. That for me is kind of like a low rung with no development. I mean, awesome would be if we could do that and then all this development, but kind of thinking if we can't get development going, maybe we can make a good enough argument to the county to say, why don't we try something different in these neighborhoods that just keep sending properties year after year and people grabbing them from outside and doing nothing with them. So something like that. Thank y'all. Yeah.